to the Waxing Crescent introductory video. I'm really been looking forward to getting into these particular phases after the new moon and the full moon, just because it really inspired me to vamp up my lunar practice. It was actually this particular phase that allowed me to kind of deep dive into the various phases and understand the significance that each phase held. So I'm really looking forward to sharing all the information that I've gained, and also some of the practices that I've been doing with these phases that have left me feeling very connected to the rhythm and the cycles of the moon. So currently the moon is moving out of its alignment with the sun and the earth, which it was positioned in during the new moon. So that's why you'll see that as it's shifting from the new moon phase, there's like a sliver of light, which creates the crescent shape of the moon. This is actually the illuminated part of the moon, and then the darker parts that you see are actually the moon's own shadow, and this is the dark side of the moon. You can see the crescent moon towards the west after the sun has set, so if you want to catch it, that would be the best time to do so. So the new moon was represented by the energy of yang. I've explained in the introductory video for the new moon the phases of yin and yang and how they are modes of operating and practicing ways of being as we exist. So because the new moon is the first phase of the cycle, it makes sense that it's yang energy because it is initiating and doing, which is some of the characteristics that is embodied by yang. So the waxing crescent naturally is a yin phase to balance out the energy of the yang in the new moon. So what yin represents and how it's characterized is by being, restoring, listening, and receiving. So the practice of yin then becomes exploring ways of how we can live and work better in our lives. Having an extreme imbalance of yang energy can actually produce an increased stress response, which kicks in our fight and flight response. Our sympathetic nervous system then activates and releases epinephrine. Then our hypothalamus produces hormones which trigger our adrenal gland and creates cortisol. So how that manifests physically is through narrowed vision. We get dry mouth and increased heart rate, and it can also suppress our immune systems. It can create insomnia and produces headaches as well. And I was actually very, I don't want to say intrigued, but it really felt validating to understand that, because there was a certain point in my life where I remember I was traveling daily to go to school, 5 hours a day. I was working 2 jobs and volunteering at the same time. Even recognizing various other areas of my life where I've just been pouring out a lot and just embodied a lot of the yang energy, to the point where it ended up manifesting physically, where I would have these horrible headaches, sensitivity to light. My stomach was just a whole mess. I think my digestion had slowed down, which is another manifestation of an overactive yang energy. And it was just interesting how there was no explanation as to what was happening medically. The doctors couldn't give me any information. They said all my labs came out fine. And now that I look back and when I read all that, I'm just like, it makes sense, because I was embodying so much yang energy and there was no incorporation of yin energy whatsoever at that point of my life. And I really identify with yang, with the masculine, and I feel like that's just an overarching theme in our society as well. We live in a culture that, again, glamorizes the hustle, working hard, having multiple jobs, not resting. Even the motto, I'll sleep when I die, is just such a detrimental and imbalanced to the extreme of the energies that we need to exist in a way that's sustainable. So for me, that became looking at the habitual patterns that I was carrying in my life and recognizing where I was pouring out and just purely acting with the energy of yang. And that is the practice of the crescent moon, is recognizing the habits that we carry that do not allow us to embody yin, to not rest, to not just be, to not just receive, to not just like listen intently to what it is that our bodies are saying. And I want to make a very clear distinction that I'm not talking about greater things that are out of our control. The stresses that come with like increased rent, precarious living, the barriers that exist within capitalism because of our sex, our race, our gender, our ability. Those are things that individual action alone cannot change. So what I'm speaking of specifically comes to our daily habits, the areas where we just pile on and act without any moment of rest and really restoring ourselves, that we can shift with proper boundaries, with proper recognition of how we are feeling in our bodies and experiencing those sensations. So it's taking a bit of the practice of the new moon from before and incorporating the reconnecting of our bodies to understanding what actions can we take to embody this yin energy. So the practice and the application of the waxing crescent becomes how do we develop an intentional opportunity to rest, and how do we begin to feel in flow? So I would say just be very mindful and aware of when you do feel like you have rested, when you feel restful, when you feel at ease in your body, and recognizing what actions have accompanied that. Action, I feel, in Western society is always attributed to yang energy, so doing, but people don't recognize that rest is actually an action as well. It's just not recognized as an action because there isn't necessarily any movement involved. However, rest is an intentional choice that you make, which makes it an action. And how rest feels and how it nourishes us varies from person to person. It can look entirely different. For me, rest is literally rest, just like laying down, not moving a lot, resting my body. In my practice, when I do yoga, for me, if I need to rest and I can tell that I can't really do a practice that is more yang oriented, more doing, I like to incorporate yin yoga, which is longer holding of positions. So that would be an example of how that is embodying the energy of yin through action, but just slowing down the practice rather than doing it at such a quick pace. And the act of yin does not suggest that we need to do less. I know a lot of times there's a lot of pushback when we talk about rest, because it's like, oh, it's not even possible. There's no way I can do less. Like, all these things need to get done. How can I just do less? And it's not about doing less. It's about moving with intention as you're completing and doing all the things that you need to do in your day-to-day life. It's about recognizing what can be pushed to another day. How can I make sure that I'm not filling up my calendar with obligations that push me beyond the limits of my body? It's about recognizing, like, where do I tell myself to keep going and to push myself when I can feel in my body that I'm exhausted and that I need rest. It's about learning, again, how to set healthy boundaries and when to say no, and when to know when you're able to show up and when you're not able to show up, what can be pushed for another day, where you can even take just 10 minutes to yourself to really just breathe and just be and just exist without the constant reminder of all the things that you need to do. So the practice of yin makes us consider, or allows us to consider rather, who we really are, how we feel, and what our ideal pace is and what our bodies are trying to tell us. So there is an exercise that was provided in the Lunar Abundance book by Ezzy Spencer to help us consider where in our lives we are more yang and where in our lives we are more yin. So that way we can identify if we have like a healthy balance between the two, or if we are more heavily leaning towards one side or the other. So I'm going to put a text box just to get in more detail, but I would ask you to consider, what energy do you embody in your professional relationships with your employers? If you have employees, your coworkers, what energy do you embody? With your familial relationships, your intimate romantic relationships, what energy do you embody? Are you more yin or are you more yang? During your exercise routine, your spiritual practice, what energy are you embodying? And as you consider that for each relationship and the ways that you show up in your life, however that may be, consider, are you more yin or are you more yang? And does it surprise you to see what you find? And again, this practice, just like every practice that we do, it's very important that you approach it with a curious mind and not a judgmental mind. There's no right or wrong way to be. There's just ways that we are. And these ways of being and existing give us information about where we can become more balanced, where we feel disaligned or aligned. So there's no good or bad way of being. It's just like, this is how I am, this is how I'm existing, this is how I'm showing up. Is this how I feel most aligned? And if it's not, where can I adjust it? Our body, our emotions, the sensations we feel in our body just provide information for us to be able to show up to the best of our abilities for ourselves and for others. So again, there's no need to judge what comes up. Just be curious and then see if you need to adjust it. Another great exercise that I like to practice throughout my day, especially if I find that there are days where I am just going to be back to back, constantly doing and initiating, is an exercise that I like to call the box breath. So, well, I don't like to call it that, it's just called the box breath. So it is when you take a breath in through your nose for 4, then you hold it for 4, you release through your mouth for a count of 4, and then you're just being for a count of 4. And then you just keep repeating that cycle, and you just keep repeating it until you feel a sense of calm within your body. And I like to do it whether I'm at work. Even before this video, I did a couple, because I do get a little bit nervous when I'm recording. And it just helps to like slow down your body, to help you settle within your body so that you can just be more at ease. It's taking in the breath, receiving breath, being with the breath, really listening to how your body's feeling so you know how many more times you need to repeat the cycle, and just restoring that sense of calm inside is literally the embodiment of yin energy. So that is the practice of the waxing crescent, and it's such an important practice after the new moon because it's creating a sustainable practice for the intentions that we set. So when you're balancing the initiating of these intentions with restoring it and being curious around what energy we're embodying, how we're making sure that we're not burning ourselves out so that we can have a long, fulfilling practice through the lunar cycle and, reach our intention, whether it is the intention that we set at the beginning or not, reaching it, feeling a sense of balance where we put in enough action, but we're doing it in a way that feels good. We're doing our work in a way that feels good. So that is the practice of the waxing crescents. Please let me know how that resonated with you. If you have other practices that you like to do that bring you a sense of just being, of being restored, of receiving rather than giving, please put the comments down below. I'd love to hear other examples of ways that you restore peace within your body. And be on the lookout for the waxing crescent. I believe it is in Gemini. If it's not, I'll probably have a little text box correcting that, which will be happening this Wednesday. Otherwise, if you're catching this several lunar cycles from now, you can just keep this with you just as examples of how you can best collaborate with the waxing crescent phase. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention, and I hope that you're able to cultivate some yin energy during this waxing crescent phase.